Hello, can everyone hear me? You please type in the chat box if you can hear and hear me and see the screen. That's right. Okay, so in case you didn't hear it before, welcome to Making Student Motivation a School Priority. I'm Janice Hosteger, the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Search Institute, and we'll get going in just a minute here. But first I want to make sure that everybody can see and hear. So if you could just please type into the chat box where you're joining us from, or just if you can see the screen and hear. Can you hear? Nobody's Okay, we're just trying to work out a few audio issues here. And I'm going to go on mute here for just a minute. Okay, thanks so much. Welcome everyone to Making Student Motivation a School Priority. Again, I'm Janice Hosteger, the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Search Institute, and I am so glad that you're along today for our webinar. First, we have a few housekeeping notes. Today we'll have about a 1-hour webinar, and we'll have a couple of sections of Q&A, one partway through and one at the end. So keep your questions handy, and you can ask Eric the questions as when he pauses the webinar for them. Also, if you haven't already, you'll want to download our facilitation guide. If you didn't download it from the email or from the confirmation page when you signed up, I put the URL in the chat box for you to access. So that'll help you take notes on all the good stuff Eric has to say today. Third, we'll be recording the webinar, and we'll send out the recording later today or tomorrow. So if you missed something, we've got you covered. Fourth, we'll be giving away a free admission to the School-Wide Student Motivation Institute. It's on August 2nd through 4th here in Minneapolis. If you want to be entered into the drawing to win that, stay tuned until the very end, and we'll select a winner from all those who are still on the webinar. So now, I'm very happy to introduce Eric Kalenze. Eric's our Director of Education Solutions here at Search Institute. He spent 10 years as a high school English teacher before holding positions in administration and education consulting. He's also the author of Education is Upside Down, Reframing Reform to Focus on the Right Problems. He's a regular contributor to publications such as Education Week and Education Post, as well as a few others. So now I'll hand it over to Eric to get us started.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, no, now you're good.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see so many names coming in from all over the country. It's very exciting, especially for someone like me. This is my first webinar, though we do a lot of engagement with schools, and I certainly have over the course of my career. Um, uh, this is a whole new format for me. So I will do my best to track things like your responses to chat items to questions you might be logging as we move through. But again, as I say, I'm kind of being broken in on this today. So uh, great to have you aboard. You can see here that the title of our webinar today is Making Student Motivation a School Priority. For folks who might be already familiar with Search Institute's REACH work, this kind of builds on some established things that we've been sharing with folks, certainly around the state of Minnesota, but then also around the country. We do have other webinars provided by our CEO, Kent Pickell, which will be a little bit more informative about what REACH is. This webinar in particular has a particular emphasis on how to start building these things into implementation in a school. Okay, so either way, there is a little bit of an introduction to what REACH is and the research that REACH is built around, and that should at least get you grounded if you are a complete newbie to search. Now again, we are Search Institute. We are an applied research organization based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've been around for better than a century. Really doing a lot of stuff with kids and the sorts of things that make them tick, that can set them up for success in school and life and family and community. We're really moving a lot of work into the schools and using that developmental research base that we've been amassing for years, as well as others, and kind of tying them together and really trying to create solutions for schools' practices, and particularly in the area of student academic motivation. And that's my role here. I am Eric, and I'm the Director of Education Solutions. There is my contact info, as well as where you can see Search Institute on Twitter. If you are interested in anything you see here today, when you get more time and when you can kind of control the flow of time, you may want to take a look at our web resources there at search-institute.org. Before we kind of kick off, I just kind of wanted to try to get a bead of the audience and who we're looking at today, because generally when we engage with schools, we know really well where they're at in the process. We know their familiarity with our resources and our research. Or when we do elective workshops, we know that folks obviously had to be interested enough to enroll in the workshops. But today we're getting a wide range of folks. So I was just hoping to see if I could get a kind of like a percentage distribution on these questions. So please use the provided poll and answer either A through D as best describes you. So which of these choices would best describe you? A, I don't know yet about Search Institute or the REACH framework, but I am interested in improving students' motivation. B, I am familiar with Search Institute's research and resources, but I'm just learning about Search's REACH framework and their work on students' motivation. C, I have attended workshops or lectures about the REACH framework, and my school or district is interested in implementing REACH more widely. Or D, I am a member of a school district already using REACH, and I'm attending to learn more about effective implementation. If you just would, please select the answer that best describes you, and then certainly use the chat box if you like, but this is wholly optional. We won't be able to go into it too deeply. If you have a moment to briefly explain what brings you to the webinar. We're just, in addition to the poll distribution, we'd just be kind of interested in gathering a little information about who's out there. And I'll just give you about 30 seconds to do that. I'm going to consult my co-webinar facilitators and see what kind of percentages we have going on there, Janice. Okay. So what kind of percentages are we seeing, Janice?
Okay, did you just,
Mm-hmm.
I just, okay. So we have 32% said, I don't know about Search Institute or the REACH framework. 57% said, I am a little familiar with Search research and resources. 9% said they're familiar with Search and REACH and their school is exploring its use. And 2% said their school is using REACH and they plan to implement it.
All right, very good. Thanks. That's super informative. It really helps know just where to place a little bit more emphasis on. And, those of us in education, we always want to know what our audience knows and proceed at pace. So thank you for that. I will definitely be peering at that information throughout. And again, if you still would like to say a few words about what brings you to us today, just remember to leave that into the chat area whenever you can. Now, a few things about just kind of our session terms today, just a few session norms. Just to let you know kind of how we're going to proceed here. Just some things to make sure we can stay on track, because very first and foremost, we value your time. We have about an hour scheduled here today, and we want to make sure that that promptly ends when we promised it would. But that's going to mean just asking for a few agreements between us. Do see the facilitation guide that was attached. This was sent either with your thank you page, or you should see it in your facilitation pane for GoToWebinar. You can print that off and use it to record notes, reflections, questions as they arise. Just wanted to basically provide some space for you there to do that. As well, I provided some kind of select key points from each section that should let you walk away without having to take notes on every little bit. Again, feel free to use that as you will. As Janice mentioned in her opening, there will be 2 Q&A breaks provided. Again, you can enter questions into chat at any time, but it's probably not going to be so interactive that we stop to address every one in real time, only for that consideration that we are hoping to keep things on track. And if you have outstanding questions or something that's more detailed and you have kind of like an inquiry you want to make that's going to take some explaining, feel free to send it to me at my email address. This is exactly what we hope to talk through with educators and build better understandings. I understand that it can't all happen in the hour space of a webinar, but I will give every email I receive my full attention. So that is Eric K at search-institute.org. Okay, so anytime you want to do that, that is my contact info. Now, pardon me. All that said, let's kind of move into the guts of the presentation. I'm going to start with a little bit of an explanation of Search Institute's work, most particularly the REACH framework, which is very much focused on improving student motivation using research-informed methods and practices. And so just going to give you a little bit of a rationale, what makes us go around here and what we're seeking to improve. The focus of REACH to us, we like to put it for our audiences that it's probably first and foremost for those kids that just don't necessarily have batteries included for their learning. No matter how we try to reach them, no matter how compelling our reasons are for one reason or another, they just don't seem to have the proper motivation, one, to apply themselves to what we ask them to do, or two, and very importantly, to overcome setbacks when they occur in their learning. Okay, so we're really for that low battery kid, or for keeping the high battery kids batteries charged. It's very much the focus of us, and we believe motivation is kind of the battery that powers all effort in schooling. And why do we focus on that? There's plenty of reasons. This is kind of an abbreviated version of something that we do in our workshops to really provide a rationale, but definitely we know enough from developmental psychology research and just basically system output types of information to say motivation is really a key thing to train our explicit attention on in schools. And here's just a sampling of them. One, we definitely know that character strengths or non-cognitive strength, like motivation, perseverance, conscientiousness, sociability, curiosity, quote unquote, rival IQ in predicting educational attainment, labor market success, health, and criminality. The work of James Heckman, who is an economist, basically brought these things to light, that these qualities are incredibly important when it comes to determining or being able to predict exactly how students will do in the world beyond schooling. Okay, and when you put them right next to academic outcomes or IQ indices, generally you will see those levels of motivation and perseverance and so forth actually mean just as much or more as any of those other indicators. Also, why is we know, just kind of studying lots of young humans, that deterioration happens when it comes to motivation. Okay, from the level of a younger student and from the time that they enter the system until they leave the system, generally we see a degradation of motivation, okay, for all kinds of reasons and with pretty predictable peaks and valleys, okay, and there are striking losses. It kind of falls off the table kind of at those transitions from middle school to high school. So when we know that's coming and we have enough statistical proof that that's going to happen, and for developmental factors, for factors related to their amount of success in school and so forth, we know it's coming. And so it's something that we can train a little extra attention on in order to get ahead of that curve rather than constantly react to it. So we choose to focus on it a lot more explicitly here at Search. Also, it just is plainly the missing piece. David Panescu, who's done a lot of work, especially on like the scalability of interventions like growth mindset, has done a lot of work to basically and made a really great case to kind of say, for all that we prioritize in education, we don't necessarily prioritize the student's psychological experience in school or their motivation to succeed, despite all we know about how it predicts good things for kids in terms of outcomes. Also, we can predict about when it's going to fall off the table and for which kids. It's something that we don't necessarily prioritize, but that we could do so much better. So these are kind of the reasons from other researchers out there that we would say it's a major focus for us at Search. A caution, however, is the cognitive versus the non-cognitive. We see it as a bit of a false dichotomy. Okay, so I think when discussion like this begins, there may be a tendency to believe that we're really just presenting something that is a complete, psychological intervention. That's partly true, but we also know that schools have very specific outcomes that they're trying to reach with kids academically in terms of their preparation. And there's a way that I put it, actually. Janice mentioned there was a book that I wrote that came out a couple years ago. I put it like this: we're essentially training kids to all run the same marathon. Okay, we can't stop it. They're going to have to join this marathon, but as a school, we're actually given a swimming pool to train them with. Okay, so we're going to have to somehow build the right strengths to get students to run a marathon using a training tool or a training ground that looks nothing authentically like the marathon itself. And so one of the ways we like to look at it is the motivation to get students to become stronger swimmers will prepare them for the marathon strength that they'll need. Okay, so if we use the we use the swimming pool well and the cognitive arena well, we will build non-cognitive strength through it. These are some of the sorts of things that you can see in a report by Carol Dweck and Greg Walton called Academic Tenacity. I thought it's summed up very well in there that academically tenacious students, or who have the proper motivation to overcome setbacks and continue learning despite the rigor of the situation, are really doing all the basic things kids will need to succeed everywhere they go. So we kind of like to think about that we're not just building motivation in a general sense, but motivation to do well in school, and so they can take both academic and non-cognitive strength out of the environment. So that's just sort of some basic things that we start with. Once we kind of working from that rationale, it gets a little tough, it gets complex, because many things actually make up humans' motivation. Okay, so those batteries, it's not as simple as just installing motivation or convincing students to be more motivated by telling them to be. We have to use a lot of things to our advantage, and to that we use evidence from the research bases out there. To make that happen, we use a thing called the REACH framework, and this was the work of a lot of folks kind of building it over time. Definitely our CEO, Kent Pickell, did a major job in trying to assemble various research bases into this categorized framework that can kind of give us a way of compartmentalizing all of these various factors, okay? And it gives us a way to really engage with schools about designing improvement. Now, this is just a very quick overview of the research base and resources, though we have a lot more depth that we can go into with this. Again, for further research on that, do look at our website, start there. We have workshops and things like that where folks come to learn about it. But this is just the quickest overview for those of you who are completely new, and that makes up close to 80% of us today. Here are what we call the 5 factors that influence motivation. The REACH framework is made up of relationships, effort, aspirations, cognition, and heart. Okay? And when we talk about each of those things, they kind of fit into an overall puzzle. And that interplay with each other and intersect in various ways once schools are beginning to turn it into practices. The R, relationships, is understanding the ways relationships with adults and peers impact young people's growth. So the power of relationships to provide motivation and to give us drive, we know that that's very important stuff. So it's a section of REACH. Also effort. With effort, the use of strong strategies and willingness to learn from failure, students can become smarter and more successful in school. So what we know about the nature of effort, what we know about being self-determined, okay, and attempting to build strong effort for students to power through setbacks, to continue being hungry, and the things we know about how young people develop that can actually help them build the right habits of mind. Aspirations. Our aspirations play a key role in our motivation, and they certainly do for young people who are figuring out their place in the world. But when students can develop positive visions of their futures, and they understand how their present choices relate to visions of their possible selves, that plays a major role in their motivation. So the A of REACH. Cognition, and students that our one sentence description would be students explicitly learn and think about their own thinking processes, both to manage learning and to practice self-control. So when we talk about the things we know from cognitive science, when we talk about the things we know from, again, developmental psych, how can we get students to be better controllers of their own thinking processes? And for that, we build understanding with practitioners about exactly which processes are working at all times. And then how we can leverage that in our instructional choices, in our school policies, in our behavioral policies. We take it a lot of places. And then HEART, basically to finish off the REACH acronym, but HEART is a pretty all-encompassing category, and basically what it means is that students know and are known for what they love to do and for their most important values. So this relates very much, as so much of REACH does, a lot of it goes back to the R, or the relationships. As we see heart, in many ways, we almost see it as a sister category to relationships, or the R, just because the things we know about kids' interests can do wonders for the types of relationships that we can build with them. The things we know about what they value deeply can do wonders for how we relate with them. And when we do all of those things, the eventual motivational impact is significant. So I hope just that was the quickest tour to basically say that's the framework. Like I say, there are several ways to explore it further, starting again with our website or workshops. But it's things that we do with schools daily, weekly, in deeper learning sessions. Okay, so that's the framework. And if you say, well, how does search attempt to actually impact those things? We do know some good news. David Yeager is, probably one of the better child development voices out there. Is publishing some of the most important work we have probably in the last few decades, and in 2011 in another paper with Greg Walton just basically said recent randomized experiments have found that seemingly small social psychological interventions in education, that is, brief exercises that target students' thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in and about school, can lead to large gains in student achievement and sharply reduce achievement gaps even months and years later. He goes on to say that it's not magical. Okay, it seems magical, but it's not. By actually doing some things explicitly with kids in these ways, and importantly, giving educators the proper tools to do it, rather than just sending them back and saying, build relationships, and having it be a pretty blunt force piece of advice. David Yeager would move that no, you can control the situation and make a huge difference. It's what we believe, it's what drives us, and it's a great pleasure to talk about with educators from all over. So that's what REACH is pretty much based on. As for what REACH is, I've kind of mentioned how the framework is made up, but I haven't gone in much to what the actual of REACH is. For us, we have a strategies guidebook, okay, and this is basically a research review plus some of our activities that can actually be done in classes in a constructed way, and REACH techniques, or just kind of general practices that can be built with classroom teachers. The REACH survey, which is actually a way of measuring a little bit how the kids' perceptions of the school environment match with the elements of the REACH framework. We have content and planning workshops, so like places where educators can come to learn more about what makes up student motivation, how they can operationalize their reaction to it, and so on. And then we have implementation support. So for schools that are actually starting to think about that next step of we've gotten the learning, we've been working with the activities, now how do we make this a truly research to practice initiative in our building? And that's kind of what we seek to create at Bottom, is less to be just a highly scripted curriculum or just a few learning workshops. We really seek to be a set of research-based practices supported by practical tools. So somewhere in the middle. And a truly effective implementation does graft itself well onto the school environment. That's a core belief of ours, that just quote-unquote doing a program or going to a workshop is probably not going to get the type of impact effect that we think educators actually changing practice in light of what we know from research can. So it's a goal of ours. And I've done this all real quickly. But at this point, I would love for anyone to type into chat, wait a minute, are you saying XYZ. If you have a question about that, let's just take, 2-3 minutes to address a few. And please use the chat box, and I will just refer to Janice and or Mary, my other colleague here at Search, to feed me a couple questions that may have rolled in.
Okay, let's see here. Not getting any questions yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that to mean that everything sounds just right.
I think that's
and
good.
that everybody has gotten at least where we're coming from, and in terms of our rationale and our materials. Again, if there is little chance for questions or little opportunity to ask them right now, again, send them to me in longer form, reach out to us. There will be contact information throughout. Going once. Going twice? Oh, oh.
Okay, we do have some rolling in here. Apologize for that. So let's see here. Eric, can you see them now, or?
Not really.
Okay, here, let's pull this out here.
Yeah, if you could just read me one, Janice, I
Yeah,
think that
I'm
would
trying.
be the
I'm
best
trying
way
here.
to go at this point.
Let's see. Are the 40 developmental assets still first and foremost?
Great question. The developmental assets are, there's very little about reach that's built on the assets. They do make an appearance, basically in the heart section, especially, and in the relationships. Like, we do ask kids to kind of ID their assets, but it is not the heart of the reach work. No.
Okay. And Deborah asks, what is the #1 thing we can begin with to increase student motivation?
I don't know if anyone is aware of the work of Ryan and Deci, but they have probably done more work with self-determination theory and what makes up motivation, and instead of just breaking it into extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, broke it into a spectrum. They're probably some of the people that we look to the most in understanding the complex nature of motivation. And Mr. Dr. Ryan just gave a talk, and he said it about the best I could hear it. And he said the cheapest and most effective intervention that you can start working on right today is in motivating kids is my teacher likes me. Is getting kids to say, my teacher likes me. So I would say begin somehow with relationships. Again, as of the things we know drive people, young people or not young people, relationships, we think of it here as an active ingredient. Okay, so like it's the thing that makes all the other interventions work, essentially.
So how long does it generally take for an educator to change from traditional behavioral control thinking to sensitive students who need understanding for their motivation to come online? So that question is from Sharon.
That's a great question, Sharon. I don't know that I would have a set answer on that, because I think it really depends on the educator. It depends on the culture they're working in. It depends on the amount of follow through. And again, as we're going to kind of move into now, as we're going to talk about implementation a lot more, I think it is a matter of implementation. Like, what's the monitoring, follow through, and coaching look like? The idea of saying, here's the research, now change. I think we would all know that it's not something we can count on with great regularity, at least in my experience.
Okay. And Craig would like to know, is Search Institute incorporating any of the work of Angela Duckworth?
Uh, yes, and thanks for that question. She is a voice definitely in the Strategies Guidebook, um, though we do approach it with the same caution that Ms. Duckworth does herself. Even she's still working out the question of whether grit can be taught, and it's a careful distinction that we make, especially when it comes to things like accountability. She published a paper again. This was in 2015 with David Yeager, who was mentioned in the overview, and she essentially said, for schools that are attempting to hold teachers accountable for building grit in kids and us objectively measuring it, stop doing that. You can look that up in Educational Researcher because she basically cautioned the field, as much as we know that it's important, as much as its predictive power to students' eventual outcomes are however powerful and significant that it is, we want to be real careful with it because we don't necessarily know if it can be taught. It's more about creating the conditions that make motivated kids based on what we know about how kids develop. But great question, yeah.
Great. So, and Randy'd like to know, what age group is this appropriate for? Is that right, Randy?
Great question, Randy. Pretty much everything we do is concentrated on the secondary grades, so recommended grades 6 and up. In the schools that we're working with right now, and we are working with 12 throughout the state of Minnesota, and they're every shape and size, charter, public, private, urban, rural, and we're getting a lot of information back from the field about who it works best with. We're having confirmed that design consideration. Grade 6 and up is typically best. We've seen folks go down as low as 5th grade. We just urge a little caution when it comes to the 5th grade, only for things like the Reach Student Survey. The items are written at a reading level that may be too challenging for some 5th graders and those kinds of concerns. But yes, thanks for bringing that up. We are thinking more about that middle year to high school year age kid.
Okay, Eric, we have quite a bit more questions. Do we want to do those at the end, or?
Yeah, we'll attempt to get. I really appreciate all the questions. At this point, we should probably get moving into like the second half of content, only because we've scheduled you guys for about an hour, and really kind of want to move into the hard part here.
Okay, so for those of you who've asked questions, if we don't get to them to the end, Eric will answer them after the webinar, but we'll try and wrap it up at the end, wrap up all the questions at the end.
Yep, sounds good. And if it's just far too many, again, feel free to engage in other ways. We would love to hear from you and address your questions. Yep, Mary Schrader is also a great person to talk to. She can really help out with kind of client solutions and just kind of arranging time to speak with folks. When we talk about the slide that's up there, implementation is always the hard part. As great as it might seem to have, wow, people have created materials to help our practitioners learn more about how kids are motivated and how relationships can be built. Let's just start doing that. That's a loaded statement, and definitely because actually getting it right in your school and making your school go from having no real plan to a fully research-informed one and having practices match that is the devil's in the details. And so when we talk about school-wide implementation, I just want to give a good 15-20 minutes to some of the big things that we know from our time in the field, and certainly my previous work has informed this side of the search work, is just saying we really like to offer a lot of considerations and recommendations for folks if they're planning to kind of take this on. Because we do think it's more than just the highly scripted curriculum or a set of learning workshops. Okay, when we're trying to go research to practice, there's often a lot of considerations to be made. Now, and to that end, here's what I would love to know just from you guys again, if you could. I have another quick poll for you. Will you please recall a school improvement initiative in your setting that didn't go so well? Okay, and that can be wide-ranging. A curricular program, a technology initiative, a school-wide or district-wide behavior program, or what have you, that once it was described and it seemed like the right way to go, and you got all the right people onto the workshop, and you sent them there for the learning, and you got it back to the school, it ended up looking more like this. That you put that boat in the water, you pointed everyone in the right direction, and it just sunk. Okay, that for one reason or another, it just never got off the ground. It's the thing people still talk about as, remember when we did ... and it went away. What I want to ask in the poll is, why in your view, did it struggle? A, was there not enough time, or it didn't fit somehow? B, the desired outcomes or operations were not well defined. You never quite knew what we're supposed to be doing or what the expectations were. C, was there little, no, or ineffective follow-up throughout the initiative? So it just sort of, we had it described to us and then we weren't sure what it was supposed to do from there. Or D, the professional development was not effective. If you would just enter your answer. And I know sometimes it's hard to choose more than one, or hard to choose only one. And then if you have, and this is purely optional, again, you see we probably wouldn't have enough time, but if you would like to share an example, we're always kind of intrigued to hear what didn't go so well. And I'll just give this.
Okay, we have about half of everyone has voted at this point, so just got a couple more people voting here, and we'll just close it real quick here. Thanks for your vote. And hold on here. And I'll share the results right here. So 17% say not enough time and it didn't fit, or it didn't fit. 7% say desired outcomes and or operations were not well defined. 68% said little no or ineffective follow-up throughout the initiative, and 7% said professional development was not effective.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And just, I think most of us present today are in education in some way, and I can tell you that I've been there, okay, and have seen implementations fall apart in very much these ways, and I would absolutely expect the heavy distribution on no follow-up, or there was ineffective follow-up throughout the initiative. It's very little surprise that comprise such a large group of us, because that's generally where initiatives that don't go well fall apart in some way. And so in kind of our study of the field and my experience in the field, we're trying to really get in front of this with the schools we work with and recommend some things ahead of time that can help schools make the best plans toward making sure these things don't happen, and that the boat you see there where that is not going much of anywhere, that doesn't become your school. If you decide to take on kind of REACH, or the explicit address of students' motivation as an improvement strategy, this is how to avoid it, how to avoid becoming that boat. Now, on effective implementation, there are lots of general considerations that we're drawing from, both from improvement science that's out there, particularly the work of Carnegie Foundation, who's doing a lot of really good things to help people become more strategic in their implementation and in their improvement decisions. We're drawing from that, our field experience, and basically how REACH works, all put together in hoping to give folks a good picture of what kind of needs to be done. And the way I like to put it is there's a few levels of implementation considerations that we ask people to go through. Um, Vitals, okay? And I mean at a cellular level. Just as in cellular life, the DNA of a cell is the basic building block of all tissue and life, so is a school's desire, need, and appetite for an intervention like REACH. If the desire for a different solution to student motivation is there, that's key. If the need, okay, as in the student population demands it, that's also crucial. And if the appetite from the professionals working in the building is also there, then you have a complete set of DNA. Too many times in our experience, we've not necessarily our REACH experience, but our field experience, we see schools that take on initiatives where the DNA was not worked out. And at some level, if the desire, need, or appetite for a certain intervention does not exist within an organization, it's very hard to get it to take off. We also talk about the systemic or the circulatory system. Okay, so we ask schools to really be careful with what we would call blood thickness. And I have a really brief story. My daughter had an immunological condition called Kawasaki disease, and Kawasaki disease basically overfills the blood with white blood cells and red blood cells and materials that go to fight disease, but there's a glitch in the system, and that glitch doesn't tell the body to stop producing it, so the body will continue sending all kinds of material into the blood that makes it so thick that it can actually really do some harm to the blood vessels. And so it needed a really aggressive treatment. That term has always stuck with me as I've gone into kind of school improvement, in that sometimes I see schools' circulatory systems so choked with stuff that it's actually bad on the circulatory system. How many initiatives are currently going on, for instance, in your setting? And if it's too many and your blood is too thick, do you have the proper room and space to be adding an initiative like improving student motivation? So those are two things that we really ask people to check out, is your vitals, and namely your DNA and your blood thickness, before ever engaging in anything like this. And when it comes to how to then, when you've determined that we have the proper DNA or a healthy DNA, and we have a bloodstream that is not too thick and we can make room for it, we start moving into the area of how do you actually plan for this as a school improvement strategy and not just a program or kind of this diffuse learning for a few people. We would recommend that you declare improving student motivation as a school goal and naming REACH as a school improvement strategy for meeting that goal. Once you do that, it really clears a lot of space for the planning and resources you need to do in terms of professional development, in terms of extra funding if necessary, and things like that. But it's kind of declared as a strategic solution. And I'll just give you kind of an example of what I mean. In Minnesota, anyway, a very common practice is we have a SIP, okay, or a school improvement plan. And once upon a time, these actually had to be reviewed by our state. And you'll recognize the goals there. You have some achievement goals that you want to meet. These are all based on your previous year data, things like that, behavior numbers, etc. And the school says to actually get better at those things, we've chosen these strategies of focus. Okay, we're going to work collaboratively in PLCs, and they're going to meet every other week. We're going to invest in co-teaching and double dosing, instructional models, and we're going to bring in AVID and try to get the whole school working AVID strategies or what have you. Okay, so basically those are the types of strategies that we would encourage and recommend schools to start thinking about REACH as. Okay, so not just we do the REACH program, but we are going to address improving student motivation using the REACH research and resources. Okay, so like here's a model school improvement strategy that might fit that bill. So we are setting out to improve students' academic motivation informed by Search Institute's REACH research, resources, and continuing professional development. Plain and simple. Or you could even get it more specific. If it's maybe not an entire school solution, you could say improve students' academic motivation informed by Search Institute's REACH research resources and continuing professional development with an emphasis on the 6th grade. So it has uh, it fulfills a very central purpose in a school. And in our work with schools, that's where we're moving them toward, is where's the best home for this material and why. And so we'll see, we're seeing the gamut. We're seeing entire districts attempt to embed it into their middle school and high school advisory programs. Still others say, nope, it's just for our 7th grade because we have good plans for the others, and that's the type of thing that we will make recommendations on, but ultimately we want the site to be using REACH toward forwarding themselves toward their improvement vision. Still, again, you can get even more specific and say, really what we want to use REACH to do is strengthen the quality of teacher-student and student-to-student developmental relationships. There's lots of combinations, and I only put a few in here to just kind of illustrate the types of things the schools we're working with are starting to move toward in focusing the effort. Because once you get those vitals out of the way and you carve kind of the proper space out in your school for it, then you have to get into the hard part of logistics and operations. Okay, how is PD for staff going to be done initially and continually throughout a year? How are we going to monitor? Okay, so that 68% of us that said there was just no follow-up on the initiative and that's how it fell apart, we really move that making that a consideration on the front end is a crucial piece of any good implementation, and then certainly working out kind of the brass tacks matters of communication, calendaring, who's responsible, thus and so. And just kind of, and I know I'm kind of flying through at this point, but as we see it, there are 4 really big considerations when it comes to this improvement initiative or strategy. There is the survey, which I mentioned earlier, and that's for students, but we may be working in a staff survey that's currently in development. We'll see if it's ready for people to be using in their improvement strategy by the fall, but that may be ambitious. Then there's obviously the in-class operations, so the anchor activities and where they happen, and the related practices related to the anchor activities. Then there's staff professional development to account for, and that continual leadership and monitoring. There are all kinds of ways to make these things happen, but really, when you work with us on it, it's less a matter of just ordering the guidebooks and doing it. We really seek to figure out solutions for you that can help it be a smooth implementation. Okay, so when I mentioned in the REACH guidebook, there are anchor activities, there's the student survey. These are kind of the in-class operations that need to be accounted for. And the student survey, by the way, has a pre-survey and a post-survey that can kind of give you a sense of how did students change over time in accord with the interventions and activities and kind of school practice cultural changes. We also have initial training to be considered. That's where we provide kind of the research foundation. We establish the practice expectations, get folks kind of in the same zone when it comes to understanding the research base that makes these activities and these practices go. Continual training, this is where we review our progress toward adjustment, and we design design practices as opposed to just doing a program. We don't really strive to be that we're just going to drop off the program people. We hope that practitioners are actually molding the insights from research into their practice and in a way that makes good sense and that will resonate with their kids. And then certainly matters of continual leadership and monitoring. We're big believers in that you have to really plan out your course, launch it into action or do, continually study it in some way, and then change your actions. And we have, there's lots of ways to monitor, and I'm just giving one example here, an example that's making a lot of headway kind of via the improvement science advances, is the idea of a practice profile that basically just spells out the practices you want to see and allows that for monitors to, whoever the monitors or leaders are, to actually see how are the practices changing and then change PD as necessary. And then a big decision for any environment is seeing who should monitor the progress of the strategy. This is another one of our big implementation considerations. It's stuff we go deep on with the schools we work with in the workshops that we offer and things like that. And my one of the final steps here is I just want to show you what one of the big goals of schools is when we set out to design an implementation. We really hope we can get them to the point where they can design their own calendar for the implementation that takes all of those considerations of implementation into mind in a strategic way, both for the carrying out in the subsequent school year and for the pre-messaging to your folks. Because I know one of the things that you'll likely hear a lot in an initiative that's just not taking off is we have to build buy-in. We have to build staff buy-in. I would move, in, just based on my experience and study, that a great way to build staff buy-in is have a coherent plan and be able to show it to folks. And so that's really where we want to get schools to, is building that plan. And I'm just going to give you, if I have along the bottom there, the months of a school year just laid out, and up the vertical axis I have just the considerations that have to be planned for. You can see in September, you would deliver the REACH survey the first time. Sometime in May, early May, you would have the post administration, and so that's one big consideration. The in-class arc of the year, like for instance, these letters correspond with the type of REACH activities or REACH practices you're really working on building at the beginning of the year. Okay, so we want to know students' interests and talents. We really want to interests and values. We want to get moving into building relationships because that's a major focus of our building in this first half of the year. So weeks 1 of September through 1 of October, we're going to just hit heart and relationships hard. Then strategically speaking, we know that when the honeymoon's over and we have to start talking to kids about pumping their effort back up, maybe we want to get them thinking about that in their advisory classes and kind of getting that into the water of our system. Around mid-November, some cognition work. So kids kind of are working on their fast and slow thinking. Basically, these are the parts that are customizable by school. So like your REACH story over the course of a year, or the arc of activities and instructional emphases that kids will receive, that's really in line with your improvement vision. We don't necessarily prescribe that, but we just support an understanding of that. And then similarly, when we move down to PD, you can see these are the days that I would say a school should schedule for its practitioners to have some REACH contact. Okay, in order to kind of keep it alive, because definitely something that I hear a lot when it comes to a failed implementation is I never knew when the PD was going to happen. I would say get in front of that as much as you can and schedule and script which PDs will be covered when and why. Like for instance here, I've made some connections between you're going to give the survey in September, schedule a PLC day to go through the data in late October. And similarly with the post data in May. Okay, so do that on the outset. It's the kind of thing that builds buy-in in staffs because they see that we have a coherent plan. We're not just doing REACH kind of blindly, but it all fits together into a puzzle. And then certainly that monitoring and leadership, that thing that 68% of us would say we just didn't have any sort of follow-through and we needed that. This is a basic script of how you would actually plan out the days and touch points for the leadership itself. And I know this is way too fast and not anywhere near specific enough, but that's really just because to say this is a basic introduction in hopes that folks might want to learn more about it. And certainly as implementation support is one of the things we offer, as implementation workshops are some of the things we offer. getting you to maybe think about learning more if any of this does sound interesting or is hitting a nerve. And so that's kind of the last place I want to stop, is to let you know about we do have some workshops coming up that can tell you a lot more detail about REACH. Um, we have the kind of like an introductory, and this is the research base behind REACH, gives participants a chance to really interactively process the insights from research and then start to design some initial practices based on research. We'll be throwing that here in June. It's in Minneapolis, so we'd love to have you come join us here. Great town, especially great in the summer. Would love to see you. And then kind of like a fully broken out version of what I've introduced today. And that's the School-Wide Student Motivation Institute. That's in August, so it's the type of thing that can build very readily on the Strengthening Student Motivation workshop. For a school that knows that, yes, we want this to be an improvement strategy and we've done all the thinking we've had to, this is a perfect place for a team of folks to actually come and sit and build that calendar I was talking about. Build the right fit for a monitoring plan for their building. Understand how the PD will work. It's a 2.5-day workshop that really takes folks through that and hopefully sends them back to their school year with a really clear plan of how it goes. And so there you will design your school's implementation of REACH. Again, it's supported. It's not purely workshop format. You'll also work in depth with the REACH resources and planning tools. I and others will be supporting that. And you reach some consensus on some of those important implementation considerations, like what's the best way to monitor this for our staff? What's the best way to message it? All those things that can hang in implementation up. We hope to have folks work very hard, but in a very supported way to come up with all they need to really launch it well. Okay, so I can just kind of leave that up there. As we're past time, and I apologize, I have this thing, and you'll see it in your facilitation guide. And I'll leave it with you because it's for me it's just a nifty formative assessment thing. I got it from a friend at a previous stop, and we would use a tool like this very regularly to harvest information about how the session just went. And it's great for your classroom too, because it's kind of like an exit ticket idea, although it is a little more structured. It might be a little bit more fun for the kids. And so if you see that graphic in your materials, what you do in the points of the triangle, in a triangle, circle, square, is you write down 3 points to remember from this time together. In the middle square, you write an idea you heard or were exposed to there that squares with your thinking. So that it firmly landed. Okay, you agree with that. You're interested in knowing more, or what have you, and then an idea still circling in the circling portion, which is just like, this is something that hasn't quite settled. I didn't agree with that. I need to know more about that, etc., etc. And it's just a neat way to kind of organize your thinking. And these were our stops again. So why focus on student motivation? The framework overview of REACH and the materials, and then the school-wide implementation kind of recommendations and some of our advisory points. I'm going to say right now, you can use that as you like, and kind of, you can use that for your own personal reflection, or it can generate a question for the Q&A break, which is right here, because this is kind of our final stop today in the webinar.
Right now.
If you have any questions that you would like, please enter them in the chat. And we also have to announce who our giveaway winner is.
Yep. Why don't we take a couple more questions first? I know some people have been waiting a while for an answer, and then we'll select a winner here. So one of the questions is, sorry here. Can you speak about addressing the aspiration piece and battling when that is negatively impacted by home, such as breaking the cycle?
Yeah, great question. One's aspirations do have very much to do with their home, and so we know that that's it's something to be accounted for, and it's sometimes difficult to feel like we can affect or control that very much. A place I'd like to refer back to, and I don't know how familiar you are with the REACH framework, but when we talk about a very powerful factor in actually developing a good relationship with a young person or anybody else is that we expand their possibilities. Okay, and so like how to seek ways that can continually expand what a kid may envision for themselves. Okay, so one's aspirations aren't, we would never say it's a static matter, that the aspirations are what they are, and then we work with them as they are. We seek to, continually open up a kid's world. So I don't know how much time it takes to do that, and it definitely takes a lot of trust. But we would say that's actually a very key piece to developing a great relationship. And I would just urge anybody listening to think about their own lives and somebody who expanded a possibility for them or created a new aspiration for them simply by recognizing one thing about them that nobody else had, or that maybe they hadn't even in themselves. For us, that's a very powerful wedge when it comes to working with kids, and then certainly as it relates to all of our academic plans. And I would hope that really kind of taking control of that and thinking about it in a more explicit way, hopefully through kind of some of the techniques that we would suggest through REACH, that folks would get new ideas about, quote unquote, breaking the cycle.
Great. So we have a winner here. I just randomly chose one. So we have, and I'm going to apologize for mispronouncing your last name. So Sally Quatana, Quaranta. So Sally, I believe you're still on the webinar. So you want to go ahead and type something in the question box, and then we'll follow up with you. I'll have Mary, our customer relationship manager, follow up with you for free admission to the workshop in August.
All right, awesome.
And
where are you from? Where's she from?
Sally, let's see here.
Oh, sorry. Sally, if you are able to get to Minneapolis, we'd love to see you.
Mary is working diligently here to answer a lot of the questions regarding the workshop itself in the chat box. So if you don't have your workshop, every question answered yet, she will get to that. Let's see here. I'm just looking for another question here. Let's see here. What strategy or practice have you found most effective in effectively penetrating a resistant student culture?
Resistant student culture takes a while. Well, I would love to say there's one way to do it. I know, and I'm going to resort to, I know my personal experience, and it's certainly things that were very transformative to me in the classroom. I had a very concentrated dose of resistant school culture when I was in a school within a school for at-risk kids. And it was basically 4 teachers plus a counselor. And we just loved the heck out of them, okay, with lots of rules. Okay, so they were kids who came to us with, they were identified for all reasons as these kids are at risk of falling off the table and dropping out before completing or taking longer than they need to complete. And so our main task was just how do we get in front of them with the relationships we build? How do we get in front of them by letting them know the expectations aren't going anywhere, that it's for their own good, and our relationships basically had to override them into the kind of effort we knew would allow them to succeed through and what was sophomore year, okay? And so getting through sophomore year was the goal. We just had to love them and expect a lot in order for them to see that we believe in you. And again, I almost hate to say it because it's going to sound so much like a broken record, but it just came so much down to the relationships and building that kind of trust. I can tell you firsthand, and I wish I would have collected better data and been a better researcher at the time, but they ended up to be some of the kids that did some of the greatest things I ever saw. And I don't mean that in a relative sense. I mean they achieved better than my quote unquote normal sophomores, my sophomores who weren't in an at-risk identification. And they couldn't have been any more resistant than anything I've seen anywhere. Okay, all of us wanted to quit every day. I'll put it that way. All of the teachers wanted to quit every day until about February, and then the tide just turned. So as for one strategy, I would love to say it's one thing, but it's just day in, day out, never give up relationships, try different tricks on the relationships. Also leverage other members of your team's relationship strengths, because we can't necessarily tell what's going to work with every kid, okay, to build that relationship.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Cynthia asks, will this work well with students in continuation or alternative ed site?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of, and for me, I think so. Just because I think anything, no matter what the reality of the student has been, everything we have, every practice we're hoping practitioners take on through this research base, every practice is based on a really good set of things we know about how kids in general develop. And so I do believe that that applies to kids who have had a little bumpier road through the school system and things like that, because it still does focus on the right things. Like I say, you may remember the graphic from earlier, the kid that does not have batteries installed for learning. Not to stereotype the alternative ed setting kids, but I think that would apply or describe them fairly well. When you all of Reach is built with those kids maybe in mind first. Okay, and so yes, I do think it would work really well. I think it would be, no matter what, I think it's really beneficial things for the practitioners working with those kids to get trained in and be more aware of and build in more explicitly.
Perfect. So I think we really run out of time today. If you're interested in either of the workshops that we have coming up, I did share the links in the chat box. So check those out, and I'm sure you'll hear more about them as the time gets closer as well. And we just want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to be in touch soon. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, everyone.